It was supposed to be a perfect Friday night in a small American town. Bright stadium lights, roaring bleachers packed with parents, students, and neighbors, and the undeniable buzz of high school football in the crisp fall air. You know the vibe: teenagers in face paint, cheerleaders waving pom-poms, the marching band belting out familiar tunes. Everyone was there, caught in that slice of American life that feels almost sacred, almost timeless. But what no one knew, what no one could have known, is that by the time the final whistle blew and the home team secured a hard-fought victory, one student wouldn't make it home. She was there cheering just hours earlier, laughing with her friends, full of life and plans for the weekend. And then she vanished. No goodbye, no trace. One moment she existed. The next she didn't. And what happened in between has haunted this town and one particular family ever since. Now, I know you're probably already asking yourself 100 questions. Where did she go? Did someone take her? Did she run away? Was there a secret life no one knew about? And here's the thing, I get it. I really do. Because this story doesn't just touch on mystery, it cuts right through the human heart. We all have people we care about, routines we trust, places that feel safe. What if one day, all of that shattered, and the only clue left behind was something as tiny and personal as a class ring, years later, on eBay of all places? What would you do? What would you believe? This story, it forces you to ask those questions. Before we go deeper, I want to talk directly to you, the person watching this right now. I don't know if you're here because true crime fascinates you, or maybe you clicked because you felt something strange reading that title, something in your gut that said, "This sounds real." Maybe you even knew someone who vanished once, or you've got that one cold case from your hometown that still doesn't sit right. Whatever brought you here, I need you to stay. Because this isn't just another mystery to scroll past. This isn't just content. This is someone's daughter, someone's friend. And in the next few minutes, we're going to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. Piece by piece. Clue by clue. No speculation, no hype. Just real answers, backed by years of silence, secrets, and one jaw-dropping twist that no one saw coming. You're here for the reason we all are, to find out what really happened. And I promise you, we're going to get there. But here's my play. If you click away now, you're going to miss something massive. Because the answer to this entire case isn't where you think it is. And trust me when I say, the second half of this story changes everything. So grab a drink, settle in, and let me walk you through a true story that starts with high school cheers and ends somewhere no one could have predicted. You're not just a viewer in this moment. You're part of the search. And I need you to stay sharp. So, let's rewind the clock to that fall evening back in 2009. The town of Fairview, nestled in Midwest, is small enough where people still leave their doors unlocked, where neighbors wave from porches, and where Friday night football isn't just a sport, it's a way of life. At the center of this night is a girl named Madison Bell, 17 years old, honor student, varsity cheerleader, known for her bright personality and the way she could make anyone laugh, even the grumpy substitute teachers. Madison was the kind of girl who made an impression, not in a flashy way, but in that quiet, unforgettable way that makes you feel like you just met someone who is going places. She had just finished cheering for the Fairview Falcons, and like most nights, she was expected to meet her friends at a nearby diner after the game. But this time, she never showed. Her car was found the next morning, abandoned behind the gym, keys still inside, and her purse left on the passenger seat. No signs of a struggle. No notes. Just gone. The police chalked it up to a runaway at first. Maybe a fight with a boyfriend. Maybe the pressure of college applications. But her parents, they knew. They felt it in their bones. This wasn't a teenage tantrum. Something was deeply wrong. In the weeks that followed, the town searched. Volunteers combed the woods. Flyers were taped to every stop sign. Local news ran specials. Her classmates held candlelight vigils and left messages on her voicemail just to hear her voice one more time. But as time dragged on, the trail went cold. Rumors spread. About strangers spotted near the parking lot, about a mysterious car leaving the area, even about someone from school who had always been a little too obsessed. but none of it ever led anywhere. And after the first year passed, the story faded into the background like so many others do. Life moved on. People graduated. New students walked the halls. And Madison Bell became a name spoken in hushed tones, in moments when silence felt too heavy. That is, until 12 years later, when a man in Phoenix, Arizona, logged onto eBay to search for vintage jewelry for his small online shop. And buried beneath listings for class rings and collectibles, one item stopped him cold. It was listed as a 2009 Fairview High School gold class ring. The seller didn't list a name, but the inscription on the inside, M.Bell, was unmistakable. This wasn't a replica. This wasn't coincidence. This was her ring, the one her parents swore she was wearing that night. How did it get to Arizona? Who was selling it? And more importantly, what did they know? You see, this ring wasn't just a trinket. It was a breadcrumb. A key. A tiny piece of evidence that could finally break open a case that had been closed too long. And if you're still watching right now, I want you to remember something. Every mystery leaves something behind. The trick is knowing where to look and how to ask the right questions. Because the moment this listing went live, a new investigation was quietly launched. And what it uncovered led to a secret so disturbing, so carefully hidden, it forced one detective out of retirement and dragged up a truth no one was ready for. We're talking family betrayals, stolen identities, a trail of digital breadcrumbs, and the kind of hidden life that could only stay buried for so long. But before we get there, before we trace this ring back to its last known owner, you need to understand who Madison really was, what her final days looked like, and how one small decision, made in the final minutes of that football game, changed her fate forever. So stay with me, because we're just getting started. And what comes next will take everything you thought you knew and flip it upside down. In the weeks leading up to that fateful night, Madison Bell's life seemed picture-perfect on the outside. Her social media was filled with typical senior year snapshots, selfies with friends in the school hallway, short videos from pep rallies, and boomerangs of her cheer squad stunting at practice. She was applying to colleges, mostly in-state, with hopes of studying education or psychology. Teachers described her as focused and driven, but not in the high-strung way. Madison had this easygoing charm that made people want to root for her. At school, she was the kind of person who could float between friend groups with ease, from athletes to the quiet kids in AP literature. But behind all the bright smiles and school spirit, there were subtle signs, barely noticeable at first, that something was quietly shifting in her world. And now, with hindsight, those signs feel more like neon. Warnings we all somehow missed. One of the last known changes in Madison's life was her sudden distance from her longtime best friend, Ashley Collins. They'd been inseparable since middle school, their names often said together like one word, Madison and Ashley. But just 2 weeks before the game, classmates noticed they were barely speaking. At first, people assumed it was a silly falling out, maybe over a boy, maybe something about prom plans. But Ashley later told police that it had nothing to do with drama. In fact, she claimed Madison had been acting paranoid, nervous, jumpier than usual. She stopped riding home with Ashley after practice, which had always been their routine, and instead began walking, sometimes taking the long way, even though it meant cutting through a wooded trail behind the school. Ashley thought it was strange, especially with the days getting darker earlier, but when she asked, Madison brushed it off with a shrug and a forced smile. She said she just needed the fresh air. Then there was the boyfriend. Or more accurately, the ex-Tyler Monroe was a wide receiver on the football team and had dated Madison on and off for about a year. They were high school sweethearts in the classic sense. He gave her his Letterman jacket, they held hands at lunch. She was always in the front row cheering for his touchdowns. But about a month before the disappearance, they broke up. And, according to multiple students, the split wasn't clean. Rumors circulated that Tyler had been texting another girl from a neighboring school, and when Madison found out, she ended it. Friends say she handled it with grace, but Tyler? Not so much. One classmate described seeing him throw his helmet across the locker room the day after she blocked his number. And a week later, there was an incident outside the cafeteria where he allegedly grabbed her wrist during an argument. Nothing came of it, no police report, no disciplinary action, but it left a mark, both physically and emotionally. And yet, despite all this, Madison kept showing up. To school, to practice, to the game. That night, she even laughed and clapped louder than usual, as if determined to prove nothing could shake her. But what no one knew at the time was that she'd recently been receiving anonymous texts late at night, always from an untraceable number. The messages started simple. I see you. You're not alone. Nice walk home today. Then they escalated. You can't avoid me forever. You think you're safe? She never showed them to her parents. Only Ashley knew. And even she hadn't seen the worst ones. Just the first few, which Madison had waved off with a laugh, calling them dumb pranks. But the truth was, Madison had started sleeping with her bedroom light on. Her grades, once spotless, began slipping slightly. Not enough for teachers to raise the alarm, but enough that one even asked if everything was okay. Madison said yes, always yes. But people who knew her best now say they felt something was off, something she wasn't saying. Then, there's the man in the truck. A few days before the game, a maintenance worker at the school, Greg Harlan, mentioned something strange to the assistant principal. He said he'd seen a white pickup truck parked near the edge of the lot during multiple practices, always during cheerleading, always facing the field. He thought it belonged to a parent at first, maybe someone waiting to pick up a student. But what caught his attention was how long the driver stayed. Never got out, just watched. And on 2 occasions, when approached, the vehicle drove off before anyone could get close. The description was vague, white, older model, possibly a Ford or a Chevy. No license plate visible. The school made a brief announcement urging parents to report any suspicious activity, but no leads came from it. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. Now, it feels like a puzzle piece that never quite fit, until the ring surfaced. Police eventually explored every angle. Tyler was questioned, of course, but he had an alibi backed up by several teammates. Ashley cooperated fully, even handing over her texts and showing investigators where Madison used to walk after school. They dug through Madison's phone records, social media, and even her emails, but nothing pointed to a clear suspect. Then, just as quickly as the investigation had built momentum, it stalled. The town moved on. Her picture came down from the hallway bulletin board. Her locker was cleared. And slowly, the world forgot. Until now. That class ring listing on eBay changed everything. The seller's profile name, Vintage Midwest Finds 78, seemed random, but the account had only been created 3 months earlier. Most of their listings were old tools, collectible watches, and some costume jewelry. Only one class ring. Only one with a name inside. When law enforcement contacted eBay, they traced the seller's shipping address to a P.O. box just outside Tucson, Arizona. It was registered under a woman's name, Catherine Ward, but the ID used had been flagged before in connection with online fraud. Authorities were ready to dismiss it as another dead end. Until they discovered something buried deep in the metadata of one of the seller's previous listings, a photograph taken on a phone linked to a man named Russell Ward. And that name rang a bell. Because 12 years ago, Russell Ward was briefly a suspect in a completely separate missing persons case in Fairview. Now we're in territory that turns this whole mystery inside out. Was Madison targeted by someone with a pattern? Someone who blends in, disappears, reappears years later under a different name and in a different state? Was her disappearance part of something bigger, something more terrifying than anyone imagined? Or is this all just an eerie coincidence, another twist in a story already tangled with red herrings? We're left with more questions than answers. Who sent the texts? What was Madison so afraid of in those final days? And why did someone wait over a decade to sell her ring online, right out in the open? And yet, we're still only scratching the surface. Because what happens next doesn't just shake Madison's case. It threatens to expose secrets the town of Fairview buried a long time ago. Secrets some people would do anything to keep hidden. The real story is just beginning. Just when it seemed like the case was gaining momentum again, with fresh leads and new digital footprints pointing to Arizona, everything started to unravel, almost like someone was working behind the scenes to pull the plug. The police requested surveillance footage from the Tucson post office where the P.O. box was registered, hoping to catch even a blurry glimpse of the person who dropped off packages. But when the footage arrived, something wasn't right. The critical days surrounding the ring's shipment, 3 full days, were missing from the archive. Not corrupted, not delayed, just gone. The security company claimed it was a system error, something to do with a software update that accidentally wiped the drive. But that excuse didn't sit well with the investigators, and definitely not with Madison's family, who had been holding on to this rare sliver of hope like it was oxygen. It felt too targeted, too precise, like someone knew exactly what they were doing. Meanwhile, a local true crime podcaster named Jenna Locke had picked up the story, bringing in thousands of new eyes and ears. She flew to Fairview to interview students, faculty, and anyone willing to talk. Her episode on Madison's disappearance shot up the Spotify charts, trending on both missing persons and cold case hashtags across Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. That online wave sparked a new wave of anonymous tips, some hopeful, some haunting. One message in particular stood out. It was short, typed in all lowercase, from a burner account. It simply said, "Stop looking. She's not yours to find." At first, Jenna thought it was another troll, just the price of digging into dark stories. But then, that same night, her rental car was vandalized outside her hotel. The tires were slashed, and scrawled across the windshield in red spray paint were the words, "Go home." Still, she refused to back down. But others, people who might have come forward with more, got scared. Interviewees canceled. Emails went unanswered. It was like someone had flipped a switch, turning off the flow of information just as it was beginning to pour. And then came the twist no one expected. A former Fairview faculty member, Mr. Reynolds, who had retired and moved to Florida 2 years earlier, reached out after hearing about the podcast. He said he remembered something strange from the week before Madison vanished. A faculty-only email, quickly recalled after being sent, mentioned a compliance issue involving school property and student confidentiality. At the time, he thought it had something to do with grades being leaked or someone hacking into the attendance system. Nothing major. But now, thinking back, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. Something bigger. He promised to dig through his old laptop and look for any archived copies. 2 days later, he went silent. No responses. No calls. And then his niece, who handled his affairs, posted on social media that he had suffered a sudden stroke and was hospitalized in critical condition. Some said it was tragic timing. Others, who were paying attention, called it something else. The tension was unbearable for those still chasing Madison's story. People who once stood firmly behind the investigation were now walking on eggshells. And then, of course, came the betrayal, the one that cut the deepest. Ashley Collins, Madison's best friend, the girl who swore she told police everything, hadn't. When pressure from Jenna and renewed police questioning pushed her to open up further, she finally admitted to deleting messages, texts from a second phone Madison had borrowed a few times during that final month. A phone Ashley had hidden from everyone, including Madison's parents. She claimed she only kept it because Madison had asked her to. But when asked why she never told investigators about it, her answers were vague, rambling, inconsistent. The phone itself?
Gone.
She said she lost it during a move the summer after graduation. Maybe it was the truth. Maybe it wasn't. But suddenly, the one person who seemed to know Madison best became another question mark in a case already thick with shadows. It was also around this time that a former classmate named Diego, who had moved out of state, came forward with a story he had been too afraid to tell back then. One night, not long before Madison disappeared, he claimed he saw her arguing in the school parking lot with an older man, definitely not a student. He remembered the man's jacket. It had a patch on the sleeve, something military or maybe security-related. But when asked for more, his memory blurred. He wasn't even sure it was Madison at first, he said. Just someone who looked like her, maybe. And without a timestamp or evidence, the sighting sat like everything else in this case, strangely compelling, but frustratingly incomplete. Still, there was one lead that refused to go cold. The class ring. An expert in recovered jewelry contacted authorities and shared something curious about the ring's condition. According to her, the pattern of wear didn't match years of casual use. It looked artificially aged. On purpose. Like someone had rubbed it down, scratched it subtly, and left it in sunlight just long enough to mimic time. Her theory? The ring hadn't been worn in over a decade. It had been stored, protected, and only recently prepped to look older, so it could pass as authentic before being sold. But why fake time on an object that was already authentic? Unless, of course, the seller wanted it to seem like it had naturally resurfaced after years of being lost, instead of being hidden. Then came one final blow, one that turned every theory upside down. A reporter in Arizona discovered something buried in an old county database, an abandoned storage unit, auctioned off 6 weeks ago. It had been in someone else's name, unrelated to the seller on eBay. But among the unsold contents was a box of high school memorabilia, yearbooks, trophies, and one blurry photo that hadn't yet made its way online. A cheerleader, mid-jump, caught by a disposable camera. In the far background, near the bleachers, was a face. Not just any face. A face that didn't belong at that game. And whoever it was watching Madison. Not the team. Not the game. Her. But who is it? And how did they end up hundreds of miles from Fairview, linked to a storage unit full of secrets? That's the question no one expected to ask. And answering it may be more dangerous than anyone imagined. Just as the mysterious face in the photo stirred new questions about who might have been watching Madison that night, another thread quietly began to unravel in the background, one no one had thought to pull until it practically screamed for attention. Samantha Reyes, a former science lab partner of Madison's and someone who'd mostly remained out of the spotlight, suddenly found herself pulled into the heart of the investigation after receiving an anonymous package on her doorstep. No return address, no postage marks. Just a small cardboard box left under her doormat early one morning. Inside was an old flip phone, the kind that hadn't been in use since the early 2000s. At first, she thought it was a prank or some junk someone had mistaken for her address. But when she flipped it open and charged it with an old USB adapter, the screen flickered to life, and what it revealed changed everything. The phone only had one saved text message, and it was dated just 3 days before Madison vanished. The message read, "Don't forget what you saw. And if you tell anyone, you'll disappear too." No contact name. No thread history. Just that. Samantha had never mentioned this phone to anyone because she truly didn't remember ever seeing it before. But when she scrolled through the device's old gallery, her hands began to shake. There were only 5 photos stored, and one of them was a selfie Madison had taken during their last chemistry lab. Her hair was pulled back, safety goggles crooked on her face, and she was laughing at something off-camera. But what sent chills through Samantha's spine wasn't Madison's expression. It was the figure barely visible in the back corner of the frame. The same man from the bleacher photo. Different angle. Same jacket. Same eyes locked in the same direction. And this time, it wasn't debatable who he was watching. The timestamp confirmed it. This photo was taken on campus, 2 days before the football game. When Samantha took the phone to police, things got even stranger. The metadata had been partially scrubbed. Someone had gone through the effort of clearing location data and other identifying information. But whoever did it missed one detail. The phone's last known signal ping from a cell tower, not in Arizona, not even in Texas where it was suspected Madison may have fled to, but from a remote rural area in northern Louisiana. That discovery reopened the case in a different direction. Suddenly, what had been a story centered in Fairview was bleeding across state lines, turning it from a local tragedy into a multi-state investigation. And with that came the FBI, who began quietly surveilling the people closest to Madison, including Ashley, Jenna the podcaster, and even Madison's parents, because at this point, no one could be ruled out. Everyone was a potential suspect. Everyone had a motive. Or a secret. The bigger shock came days later, when Jenna received an encrypted email on her podcast's tip line. It was just one line of text. She was supposed to meet someone that night. Attached was a low-res image of what looked like a parking receipt, time-stamped just after the football game ended. The license plate had been intentionally blurred, but what stood out was the lot number. It belonged to an old municipal park on the far side of town, one that had long since fallen into disrepair. Jenna drove there immediately, filming a segment for her TikTok followers. But what she found was unsettling. The trees were overgrown, paths crumbled, and graffiti covered the picnic shelters. But near the base of an old lamp post, beneath dried leaves and debris, she spotted something half buried in the soil. A piece of torn notebook paper, water-stained and barely legible, but clearly written in teenage handwriting. It said, "You promised it'd be over after this. You said I'd be safe." And just like that, a whole new narrative began to form. What if Madison wasn't just a victim of a random act? What if she was involved in something deeper, something dangerous that she couldn't just walk away from? What if someone had manipulated her, made her believe she was doing the right thing, only to betray her at the last moment? Suddenly, Madison wasn't just the missing girl. She became a key player in a secret no one fully understood. But not everyone believed the clues were authentic. Online sleuths began to argue that the notebook page had been planted, either by someone looking to keep attention on the story, or worse, to steer it in the wrong direction. The rise in conspiracy videos across YouTube and Reddit only made things more chaotic. Some claimed Madison had faked her own disappearance, pointing to inconsistencies in her behavior and unconfirmed sightings years later. Others insisted the whole story was being manipulated by someone behind the scenes, someone powerful enough to erase footage, forge evidence, and intimidate witnesses. And then there were those who believed the truth was far simpler, too painful to accept, so people kept looking for something more complex. But even the skeptics couldn't explain the next twist. Just as Samantha was preparing to leave town for her own safety, she received a second package, this time through regular mail. It contained a photograph of Madison and Samantha together, laughing at a school dance. On the back, in red ink, were 5 chilling words: "You're next if you talk." There were no fingerprints, no envelope, no stamps, just a single message that reminded everyone how real the danger still was. Who is this person watching Madison in all these photos? Why did they seem to know her schedule, her location, even her private moments? Was it someone close to her, hiding in plain sight? Or was it someone she trusted, someone who led her into a trap she never saw coming? And more urgently, why were they still watching now? The first time Samantha noticed the gray sedan, she didn't think much of it. She was used to seeing the occasional car parked across the street from her apartment complex. Neighbors had visitors all the time, and random deliveries were nothing unusual. But this car didn't move for hours. And when it finally did, it returned the next morning, and the morning after that. The windows were tinted just enough to obscure the driver's face, but every so often, the glint of a camera lens or the subtle glow of a phone screen gave away the presence of someone watching. Samantha tried to rationalize it, telling herself it might be a coincidence, that the media attention around Madison's case was bound to draw people out of the woodwork. But the timing, the consistency, the subtle intimidation, it all started to feel too pointed. She began checking her locks twice, then 3 times before bed. She unplugged her smart speakers, disabled her phone's voice assistant, and started using cash instead of cards, fearing someone could be tracking her every move. And still, the feeling of being hunted crept deeper under her skin, as if her own shadow had turned against her. It wasn't until her neighbor, Rachel, a quiet nurse who often brought over leftovers and had grown close to Samantha during the chaos, vanished without a word, that the situation turned from unsettling to terrifying. Rachel didn't show up for her night shift at the hospital, didn't answer her phone, and left behind a purse, keys, and even her car. At first, police treated it like a voluntary disappearance, citing no signs of struggle. But Samantha knew better. Rachel was careful, methodical, and above all, loyal. She had even helped Samantha sort through some of the documents they found on the old flip phone, promising not to say anything unless it became urgent. Her sudden absence wasn't just bizarre, it was a message. Someone wanted to make it clear that even standing next to the truth was enough to make you disappear. Panic began to infiltrate every corner of Samantha's life. Her thoughts, once focused and determined, now spiraled into paranoia. Every stranger in line behind her at the grocery store seemed like a potential threat. Every bump in the night, every car door slamming outside, sent her pulse racing. She started sleeping with her bedroom light on, with her shoes by the door, just in case she needed to run. There were moments she caught herself rehearsing explanations in her head for things she hadn't done, like she was already preparing for someone to frame her. When the fear became too heavy to bear alone, she called Jenna, hoping the podcaster who had once been so bold and vocal might still have that same fight in her. But Jenna's voice was different now, lower, cautious, as if she too had started to feel the weight of eyes that shouldn't be watching. Jenna revealed that she'd received a second email from the anonymous sender. This time, there were no words, just a video file, heavily pixelated, time-stamped 2 weeks ago. It showed someone digging in the woods near that same municipal park where Madison's old note was found. The figure wore gloves, a hoodie, and kept their head down, but it was clear they were burying something wrapped in what looked like a duffel bag. The footage cut off abruptly, and attempts to trace its origin came back empty. But what shook Jenna most was what she found later on her own doorstep, another copy of the video on a USB stick, with a sticky note that read, "You're asking the wrong questions." No fingerprints. No prints on the note. Just silence that screamed danger. As the walls began closing in, Samantha couldn't stop thinking about Madison. Not the headlines, not the rumors, but the actual girl behind the smile. What had she seen? Who had she trusted? What was the last thing that went through her mind before she vanished into a silence no one could break? The deeper Samantha looked, the clearer it became that Madison hadn't just disappeared, she'd been erased. Systematically, precisely, as though someone had taken apart her life piece by piece and swept it away before anyone could notice. And now, someone was doing the same to Samantha, making her question her sanity, making the people closest to her vanish, making her wonder if she'd make it to next week without becoming the next headline on a viral true crime TikTok. The story, once about finding answers, had turned into a race to survive. Samantha had to choose between staying silent and safe, or continuing to dig and risk losing everything. But even with the fear and the sleepless nights, she couldn't shake the sense that she was close, closer than anyone had ever been. And that's when the most chilling moment of all occurred. Late one night, she received a voicemail from a blocked number. No one spoke. There were only the faint sounds of leaves crunching underfoot, the wind rustling through trees, and then, after nearly a minute, a voice whispered something barely audible. Samantha played it back over and over until she made out the words. We warned her, too. What did they mean? Who was we? And what happened to Madison after that warning? The terror wasn't just in what had happened. It was in knowing that the same fate might now be coming for her. Just when Samantha felt the fear had reached its limit, when she thought she'd seen every twisted corner this mystery had to offer, the truth slammed into her like a truck with no brakes. It started with a routine scroll through Reddit, something she did more and more to see if others were picking up on the story, sharing clues, or spinning their own theories. She rarely commented, mostly read, but a new thread caught her eye, one buried deep in a conspiracy forum, posted under a throwaway account that was only minutes old. The title read, "She's not missing. She's protected." At first, Samantha rolled her eyes, assuming it was more cryptic nonsense from keyboard detectives with too much time. But as she clicked, her pulse slowed. The post included a photo, a high-res screenshot taken from a security camera feed dated just 2 days ago. The image was grainy, black and white, and time-stamped from a cafe in a small town 3 states away. The woman in the photo had her hair pulled back and wore dark sunglasses, but there was something unmistakable about her jawline, the tilt of her head, the posture. Samantha's breath hitched. It was Madison. She stared at the image for minutes, her heart pounding louder than the clock ticking on her wall. If it was real, and it looked too crisp, too raw to be doctored, then everything changed. Madison wasn't just gone. She wasn't dead, either. She was hiding.
But why?
And more importantly, from who? For hours, Samantha sat frozen, replaying every piece of the puzzle in her mind, and suddenly small things that had once seemed random began to take shape. Madison's odd behavior in the weeks before she vanished. Her sudden fights with friends. Her growing paranoia. Even the message in the locker, "It's not who you think." What if the entire story, the one Samantha, Jenna, the media, and even law enforcement had been chasing, was wrong from the start? Fueled by adrenaline, Samantha called Jenna, who didn't pick up, and then drove to her apartment. When she arrived, she didn't find Jenna. Instead, she found Jenna's research board flipped over, her laptop missing, and a sticky note on the floor that read simply, "Stop digging." That's when her phone buzzed again. Another email. This time it was from Jenna's account, but the tone was off, terse, cold, with a message that said, "I've moved on from the story. You should, too. Don't contact me." No explanation. No goodbye. Samantha knew her well enough to recognize a forced hand when she saw one. Desperate and feeling betrayed, Samantha drove home and sat in the dark, poring over the old flip phone again, the one she and Rachel had once studied before Rachel disappeared. She hadn't turned it on in weeks. When she did, a strange file auto-loaded, a video she'd somehow missed. It wasn't labeled and wasn't in the camera roll. It showed a group of people in a dimly lit room, maybe 6 or 7, all wearing masks. At the center was Madison. She was standing, speaking directly to the camera, her voice steady. "If you're watching this, I didn't disappear. I ran," she said. "They wanted to use me, control me, and when I tried to leave, they made threats. So, I left on my own terms. This isn't just about me. It's about what I found." The video glitched and cut off abruptly. There was no way to recover the rest. Samantha felt the air suck out of the room. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was a cover-up. Not just of a crime, but of a much larger operation. Madison had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to, and instead of becoming a victim, she staged her own escape. Suddenly, all the threats, all the warnings made a brutal kind of sense. Samantha had been inching closer to something massive, something powerful enough to reach across state lines, silence witnesses, and erase evidence. Then came the final blow. Samantha's father, who had remained distant from the story and whom she hadn't spoken to in weeks, showed up at her door unannounced. He looked pale, shaken, and before she could ask anything, he handed her an envelope. Inside were 2 things: a photo of him in military uniform standing beside a man Samantha didn't recognize until she flipped the image over and saw the name. It was the same last name as the former police chief who had investigated Madison's case. "He's not who he says he is," her father whispered. "None of them are. And your friend Jenna, she was warned. Just like Madison. And now I'm warning you. Stop." Everything Samantha thought she knew about the people around her began to blur. Her own family had ties to something deeper than she imagined. Jenna was either silenced or compromised. Rachel was gone without a trace. And Madison had been trying to expose something far more dangerous than a stalker or a jealous ex. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a battle between staying quiet and staying alive. But the most terrifying part? Somewhere out there, someone was still watching, still pulling strings, still waiting to see what Samantha would do next. And with that realization, the story took a turn no one saw coming, because the biggest secret had yet to surface, and when it did, it would change everything. The storm didn't roll in all at once. It crept, slow and heavy, like fog blanketing a town before sunrise. Samantha sat in her car just outside her father's house, the photo of him and the former police chief gripped in her trembling hands. She hadn't spoken since he handed it to her, hadn't asked a single question. But the silence between them said more than words ever could. Her father knew something, had always known something. And now, every memory she had of him, every story he'd told about his military days, every instance he warned her to stay out of grown-up business, came roaring back with an edge of suspicion that made her chest tighten. She had come here for answers, and instead, she found herself staring at a man she could no longer fully trust. Inside, they sat in the kitchen where she'd eaten breakfast as a child, a place that once held warmth and safety but now felt staged, hollow. Her father avoided eye contact, shifting in his seat, his jaw clenched. "You need to let this go, Sam," he said, voice low. "I didn't want you to get caught up in this. None of this was supposed to reach you." She snapped, voice cracking. "Then why is my best friend missing? Why did Madison vanish? Why did Rachel disappear after helping me? Why am I getting threats from people I've never even met?" Her father looked down at his hands, and after a long pause, he said, "Because you got too close to something people are willing to kill to protect." Samantha felt the air leave her lungs. He didn't deny anything. And worse, he didn't offer a way out. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table. "This is all I have. But if you open it, there's no going back. Once you see what's on there, they'll know. You'll be marked like the others. And I can't protect you." She stared at it like it was ticking. "You're giving me a choice?" she asked. He nodded. "Walk away, and I'll get you a new identity. We'll relocate. You can start fresh. But if you open that drive, you keep going alone." It wasn't just a choice, it was a test. Truth or safety. Legacy or survival. That night, back at her apartment, Samantha didn't sleep. She held the flash drive in her hand, turning it over again and again. She thought about Madison, her smile, her fearless energy, the way she used to say, "We were born to shake things up." She thought about Rachel, who'd believed in her when no one else did. About Jenna, whose silence felt more like a scream now. And then she thought about her father, a man who'd lived in secrets for decades, willing to bury everything, including the truth, to keep the peace. The decision weighed on her like 1,000 bricks. But deep down, she knew she was never going to walk away. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, Samantha drove to the one person left she still trusted, her mom's sister, Aunt Marie. A retired journalist who once uncovered corruption in City Hall, Marie had fire in her veins and a Rolodex of contacts that stretched from local news anchors to ex-FBI investigators. Samantha didn't show her the flash drive immediately. Instead, she told her everything. The threats, the footage of Madison, the disappearance of Rachel, her father's military photo, and the final warning he gave. Marie didn't flinch. "If you've stirred something this big," she said, "then you're already in it, whether you like it or not." That same afternoon, as they prepared to open the flash drive, Samantha received a call from an unknown number. She didn't answer. A text followed seconds later. "You open it, she dies." Attached was a photo, grainy, time-stamped just minutes ago, of Jenna sitting on a bench at a park not far from her old apartment. She looked unharmed, but the implication was clear. They were watching. They knew. And now, the stakes weren't just her own life. They had Jenna. Her hands shook as she showed the phone to Marie. "They're bluffing," Marie said. "It's scare tactics." But Samantha wasn't so sure. This wasn't a game of psychological chess anymore. This was real, tangible. If she opened the drive, she might find the answers she'd been chasing for months. But Jenna could pay the price. And yet, if she didn't, how many more would vanish? How many other Madisons were out there, lost to some faceless network that thrived on silence and shadows? Samantha stood at the edge of a choice no one should ever have to make. Save the friend she could see or chase the truth that could save countless others. Her heart told her one thing. Her conscience pulled the other. And as the sun dipped below the skyline and the room darkened around her, she made her move, not out of clarity, but because sometimes, when you're already neck-deep in the dark, you don't crawl out. You dig deeper, hoping the next layer holds the light. But what she found next wasn't light at all. It all came crashing down in a single hour. The moment Samantha cracked open the flash drive, she expected to find files, maybe some classified reports or cryptic logs, something that required decoding. But what greeted her instead was a polished, coldly professional interface with a directory of hundreds of names, dates, and archived footage. It wasn't just about Madison. It wasn't even just about the town. The folder labeled Ophelia revealed a nationwide network, a decades-long covert operation masked under various identities, social youth projects, private security studies, and even student wellness surveys. Samantha's stomach dropped as she clicked through files labeled with familiar school names from different states, all leading to the same conclusion: surveillance, profiling, and in certain cases, disappearance. The video clips were what broke her. Dozens of young women, all eerily similar to Madison in demeanor and age, appearing confused, filmed in clinical rooms. Some spoke, asking where they were. Others just sat dazed. And then the footage would cut. There was no follow-up, no resolution, just cold ends. Samantha slammed her laptop shut, ball rising in her throat. Whatever this was, it reached far beyond a missing persons case. This was systemic, institutional, and worse, coordinated. She ran to Marie's office in the back of the house. "We have to go public. This is bigger than us. Bigger than anything I imagined." Marie looked up from her phone, her face unreadable. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I've already sent the first wave to a friend at ProPublica." Samantha's relief was immediate until Marie added, "And we're not safe here anymore." The house phone rang. Marie answered but didn't speak. She just listened. Her face drained of color. Then she hung up and grabbed Samantha by the arm. "That was your father. He says it's already out of our hands. They know where you are." They drove in silence, heading to a safe house Marie had used during her reporting days. But along the way, as Samantha replayed the footage in her mind, a name kept resurfacing: Dr. Hallstrom. A school psychiatrist Madison had mentioned once, the one who always seemed too interested in mental health check-ins, even for students who never asked for help. His name was listed in several files on the flash drive, tied to multiple districts across the country. A puppeteer hidden in plain sight. But the real gut punch came when Samantha finally connected the dots between the photo of her father and the former police chief. A deeper search into military records revealed a shared history, not in combat, but in logistics and behavioral analysis for an experimental surveillance task force. It hit her like a freight train. They weren't just friends. They were architects. Back at the safe house, Marie set up a burner phone and tried to contact the journalist again. No answer. Then her computer screen flickered. Files began deleting themselves. One by one, the names and evidence vanished before Samantha's eyes. "They're inside," she whispered. "They're wiping it." And that's when the worst moment hit. Marie's phone buzzed, and Samantha saw the name flash across the screen. Rachel. Alive. Marie answered, putting the call on speaker. Rachel's voice was shaky, rushed. "Samantha, they're watching everyone. It wasn't just me. They made me lie. I never left. I've been working for them. I didn't have a choice." Samantha froze. "Why? Why didn't you warn me?" Rachel broke down. "Because if I didn't do what they said, they were going to kill my brother. And now they're coming for you too. Get out. Please." The call ended. It was betrayal, but it wasn't clean. It was layered with pain, coercion, and fear, just like everything else in this twisted maze. But there was no time to process it. No time to breathe. In the distance, tires screeched. Headlights swept across the wall. Marie peered out the window. "We're boxed in." Samantha looked at her. "How much time do we have?" Marie didn't answer. She grabbed a bag and pulled out a backup flash drive. "We have one shot." Samantha clutched the drive like it was the last beating heart of the truth. Everything else had burned. Everything else had crumbled. But this tiny device held a pulse. And now, she had to run. Not just for Madison or Rachel or Jenna, but for everyone who'd been silenced and buried beneath this giant machine of lies. The system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. And the real horror? She was starting to think her father wasn't just involved, he might have built the whole thing. They had reached the edge of the map, literally and metaphorically. Samantha and Marie found themselves deep in the Colorado Rockies, inside an abandoned research compound that had long since been wiped from public records. It had once belonged to a government-funded behavioral sciences program under a name nobody used anymore, the Iris Protocol. Everything about it felt dead, frozen in time with peeling walls, rusted security doors, and a lingering silence that crawled under the skin. But the biometric lock still worked. Marie had an old clearance badge she'd kept as a souvenir from her days chasing leaks and whistleblowers. As the steel doors groaned open, what they found inside wasn't just the last trace of the program. It was the origin point. The files were here. Not digital, but hard copies, kept in sealed drawers, protected by layers of dusty clearance forms and old-school filing systems. Samantha's hands trembled as she flipped through case after case, each more horrifying than the last. Madison's profile was there, flagged as a Tier 4 candidate, a classification that, according to the program's internal rubric, labeled her as emotionally resilient, intellectually capable, and socially isolated, the perfect subject for long-term behavioral manipulation and retention. It wasn't random. It had never been random. Madison had been chosen, and not because she was vulnerable, but because she was strong. The program was designed not to target the weak, but to twist the strong into silence. But there was one file Samantha wasn't prepared for, her own. Her name stared back at her from the folders tab. Photos from when she was 13. Notes on her high school behavior. Counseling sessions she never remembered. Even her college records, marked with surveillance annotations. Marie looked over her shoulder in stunned silence. "You were one of them," she whispered. "Not as a victim, but as a control." Samantha stumbled backward, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of the tornado that was shredding everything she thought she knew about herself. That's when a voice echoed from the far end of the hall. "I knew you'd come," her father said, stepping into the flickering light with a calm that made her blood run cold. He wasn't armed, but the way he carried himself made it clear he didn't need to be. "You were always smart, Sam. Smarter than the rest. That's what made you valuable." Samantha's jaw clenched. "You did this to Madison. To Rachel. To me." He shook his head, almost regretfully. "I didn't do anything. I followed orders." But the line between protocol and protection, it blurred long ago. Madison was never meant to vanish. That was a deviation. That was Hallstrom. It was the first time Samantha heard him place blame elsewhere, and yet it felt like another manipulation. "You let it happen," she spat. "And now you're standing here trying to justify it?" Marie stepped in between them, her voice steel. "We have everything we need. The files, the names, the full chain of command. This ends today." But her father only smiled. "You think anyone will believe you? You think the world wants to know the truth?" He took a slow step forward. "This isn't a rogue operation. It is the system. All we did was strip away the illusion." Samantha stared at him, her whole body shaking. Not from fear, but from fury. Years of gaslighting, of silence, of unanswered questions had finally led her to this boiling point. And yet, even now, he didn't see her as a threat. Just a child throwing stones at a fortress. She took the flash drive from her pocket and held it up. This has everything. Even if it takes years, someone will listen. Someone will believe." Her father didn't flinch. "Then go ahead," he said. "Just remember, if you expose us, they'll come for you too. And the next time, there won't be a Marie to protect you." It was then that the power cut. The compound was plunged into darkness. In the pitch black, footsteps echoed. More than just theirs. Samantha's mind raced. Was it a trap? A cleanup crew? And then the emergency lights kicked on, and Marie was gone. No struggle, no sound. Just gone. Samantha screamed her name, running down corridor after corridor, but there was no sign of her. Her father stayed where he was, not chasing, not interfering, just watching. Back at the central archive room, one drawer had been left open, Marie's folder. On top of it, a photo Samantha had never seen, Marie shaking hands with Hallstrom. The date read 2008. Long before Madison vanished. Long before Samantha ever met her. The betrayal hit her like ice water. Marie wasn't just a rogue journalist. She had been part of the system once too. The difference was she had tried to atone. Maybe that's why she disappeared. Or maybe she had never truly left. Samantha stood there, caught between the ruins of the past and the terrifying weight of the truth. The files were real. The program was real. And the only way to survive now was to make a choice: run and disappear into the system like all the others, or leak the truth and watch the world unravel. But before she could decide, her phone buzzed. A single text. No number. Just one line. She's not the only one they kept alive. And with that, the floor dropped out from under everything she thought she knew. The mystery wasn't over. It had only just begun. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the mountains as Samantha stood alone at the edge of the old compound, her breath forming small clouds in the cold spring air. The files were gone, uploaded and mirrored across half a dozen encrypted platforms overnight. Truth, finally, had been let loose into the world. Some would call it a conspiracy theory. Others would dig deeper and find the raw, unvarnished truth staring back at them like an open wound. The headlines had already started to shift: government experiments, missing persons, unethical behavioral programs. Some networks called it disinformation, but the hashtags were trending, the public was asking questions, and the silence that had protected the program for so long had finally cracked. Samantha had gone from being a confused daughter to the accidental whistleblower behind one of the darkest secrets buried in U.S. history. Still, none of it brought Madison back. She visited the old farmhouse one last time, the place where it all began. The porch still creaked. The wind still carried the faint scent of lilac from a bush that hadn't bloomed in years, and the swing Madison used to sit on still swayed slightly, as if moved by something unseen. There were no answers waiting here, no hidden files or voice recordings to solve the last of the mystery. Just echoes of what used to be. Samantha sat on the steps, her laptop open, watching the chaos unfold in real time. One of the major news outlets had just confirmed their own source inside the Department of Defense. They were calling it a gross misuse of psychological testing for national security applications. But they didn't mention the names. They didn't say Madison or Marie or Hallstrom. They sanitized it, reduced it to clean terms for the public to digest. Still, it was something. It was enough to shake the foundation. She thought of Marie often, wondering if she had been taken, or if she had chosen to disappear again. There had been no more texts, no more clues. Just that last chilling message: she's not the only one they kept alive. It haunted her, not because she feared who else might have been trapped, but because it meant the story wasn't over. And it might never be. Somewhere out there, the rest of the protocol still lived, maybe buried in private labs, maybe repurposed under new names, maybe already in motion again under a different guise. In a world driven by clicks and algorithms, where true crime and mystery stories top the trending pages, Samantha realized something painful. The truth didn't always change things, but it forced people to see. And sometimes that was the most anyone could do. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a video link. A girl, blonde, quiet, sitting in what looked like a clinic room, staring directly into the camera. The tag read, "Recovered subject, Tier 4 to 2025. Samantha's breath caught. The girl looked just like Madison. A little older, more fragile, but unmistakably her. She watched in stunned silence as the girl whispered, "If you're seeing this, I remember." The video cut off abruptly. Samantha closed her laptop. Her mind raced with possibilities, but her heart felt strangely calm. Madison was out there. Somehow. Somehow she had survived the maze. It wasn't closure, but it was enough to give hope. And in a story filled with lies, betrayal, and erasure, hope was the most radical ending she could imagine. She stood up, eyes locked on the horizon, where the mountain's edge kissed the sky. The truth had cost her everything: her family, her identity, and the last remnants of the life she thought she had. But as she walked away from the farmhouse for the last time, she carried something else with her: conviction. That maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't ending. It was only being passed on to the next voice brave enough to tell it. And somewhere, behind another locked door, someone else was waiting to be found.